Hi, friends, and welcome. On today's adventure, we're headed west, all the way out to Meeker, Colorado for an archery elk hunt. Now, if you're a frequent flyer, then you probably already know every single chance I get, I go out to visit and hunt with my very good friends, Judy and Pete, Susan and Paul, everybody out at Shelton Ranch Outfitters. And this year was to be no exception. But there was a bit of a twist. My good friend Brandon Jurries, after seeing several of our previous adventures, called up and said, "Hey, are you going out to Shelton's this year?" And I said, "Of course, unless they bar me from the state of Colorado, I'm going." He said, "Could I go with you?" He said, "An archery elk hunt, that has been a lifelong dream of mine, and I really, really would like to go." And I thought about it, and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. If you're willing to help out a little bit, do some work, carry the tripod and the camera, my backpack, maybe do some dishes in the lodge, some laundry." I tell you what, when I walked out to get in the truck 4:30 the next morning, he was already sitting in it with my coffee. He really wanted to go. So, I'm your host, Kyle Randall. This is my Wilderness Journal, and we're headed west for Brandon's first elk hunt right now. It was good to be back on Pete's Mountain. And after visiting with Pete and Judy for a little while, Pete took us all for a tour around the ranch to show us some of the spots, and we were all having a good time enjoying the ride. Well, at least most of us were. And not long after the grand tour, we got into our stands. It was time to go hunting. And not long after getting into the stands, Brandon was staring at his very first mule deer. A small buck, still in velvet, was working his way down the hayfield headed toward the water tank Brandon was staked out on. And before the buck even got there, he was joined by another small buck and a doe with a couple of yearling fawns. These certainly weren't elk, but it was a great confidence builder to be that close and to be seeing game right there in your face if an elk did make it in here. Well, let's just say this would be really good practice for when one did. Brandon watched quietly as the deer drank their fill and then left. And then, just before dark, a group of antelope came in and did the same thing. This was great entertainment, but so far at least, no elk. And Brandon wasn't the only one seeing deer that first night. From where I was set up, I could see several does and fawns working their way down, coming in for a drink. These weren't big old bull elk either, but I have to tell you, friends, I've been doing this a long time, and if you love the outdoors, if you're a hunter, you just love the outside, this picture, those three does standing there getting a drink, if that doesn't reach in and touch you, well, let's just say you might want to go out and get your eyes checked. And after drinking their fill, these deer started to leave, only they didn't walk out in the field. They actually walked up and made a circle right around the blind I was setting in. They were absolutely reach out the window and touch them close. And even though this wasn't a big old buck or a bull, if you're a deer hunter, you know just how exciting it is to get that close to game. And speaking of big old bucks, just before dark up on the ridge, I did get a chance to see one of them too. Our first 2 days were really hot and unfortunately elk free. That's the way it is in the first week of the season. It's the absolute toughest time to hunt these critters, but I knew that if we just stuck to it, Brandon was going to get his chance. We were seeing plenty of game, more than enough to keep us entertained and paying attention. We just needed to stick it out, and sooner or later. And fortunately, it turned out to be sooner. The very next evening, Someone's playing in the water tank. Several good-looking cow elk had come in, got a drink. One of them even stood and played with its own reflection in the water for a few minutes, and then they slowly worked their way out across in front of us. But for the moment at least, I hadn't seen a bull with this group. The elk rut'd be starting any day, so I just sat there waiting. You never know how far behind he might be coming. Hey Brandon, those were an elk. No bull. It was good to see some elk close up, even if I didn't see a bull with them that night. It was good to see some elk finally coming to water, and even though these cows and calves didn't have a bull with them yet, I knew it was just a matter of time. The elk rut would be firing up any day now, and Brandon did have an either sex tag. He could take a bull or a cow, and he had told me earlier he would be happy with either one. All he really wanted to do was get up close and get a shot at an elk. He was so excited to see one, in fact.
Right there, big bull. Up on the ridge.
Oh, I see. Big mule deer.
Wow, it's a big mule deer.
It's 2 mule deer. Yeah, the second one isn't near as good, but he's still a shooter.
Yeah. Jeez, I thought it was an elk. Unreal.
Brandon had mistaken a couple of mule deer going up a ridge for elk. They're both right there.
Yeah. Wow, look at them.
That's a shooter.
One behind it is too.
Yeah. You know why they're up there, right?
Because we don't have a tag.
Yeah. They either don't know we're here, or they don't care. Or they're just like, Kyle didn't draw a deer tag? Really? How unfortunate.
They're both shooters too.
Oh, yeah.
I'd put them on the wall.
You take that home with you?
Yeah.
I'd give him a year, you know.
I'd take it home to Mama.
I want to give him a year.
Holy cow.
It figures. The elk keep going the other way. Big mule deer show up, got no tag. You know what we need now is a couple of giant antelope to come by and say, hey,
How you doing?
this place is amazing, though, isn't it?
Oh, it is gorgeous.
You sit out here and you think, boy, there ain't nothing here, and then all of a sudden, there they go. Well, that may not have been a big bull, but it was a couple of pretty nice mule deer bucks. And when it comes to hunting at Shelton Ranch, well, you might want to be careful what you wish for when it comes to other critters, because yes, they have antelope too. And fortunately, the very next morning, we did manage to close the distance in on some real elk. In the gloom of first light, we stood watching several cows and calves working their way up the ridge, up toward the place I'd seen them come from when they came to that water tank earlier in the hunt. We just held our ground, waiting to see were there any bulls working along with this group. There were now 5 or 6 of them, and I figured for sure that they'd pick up a bull somewhere along the line. And even though I could see them all the way to the top of the ridge, I never did spot one. After watching those cows and calves go up to bed that morning, just above the water tank that I'd seen them drinking out of 2 nights before, I suggested to Brandon that he stake out that spot for the evening hunt. I felt real confident that at least some cows would come down. Who knows, maybe a bull, maybe both. And he was absolutely stoked. He said, hey, I'll go sit there if it takes a month. And a full hour before dark, a couple of cows did work their way down to get a drink. Brandon got himself ready. This cow was less than 30 yards away and obviously dry, meaning she had no calf. This would be a great elk to shoot. This was definitely an elk worth taking a run at. Only he didn't. He sat, he watched, but in the end, he never did even try a shot. He had told me he'd be happy with a bull or a cow, but I guess something had changed. Close. That was certainly a shooter, a good-sized dry cow, but Brandon had decided he was going to wait. Maybe a bull was going to follow her down to that water tank. Unfortunately, none did, at least not during legal shooting hours that night. I did decide after talking it over with Pete, though, it was time for a move. We were going to shift to the other side of the ranch, see what was working its way around there. And just at first light, we saw him. A whole herd of elk down on the rock field. We tucked ourselves into the shadows and did a little calling and then watched as they crossed the road. There were several bulls down there, and some of them were even answering. There they are, right down on the road. There was a good-sized bunch already crossing the road, and there had to still be 30 or 40 head out on the ridge on top of the rock field. We sat watching them. I could see a couple of bulls and I could hear a couple more pushing cows around. They were obviously trying to separate out their herds. And all I needed was for one of them, any of them, to decide this was the way to come up to bed. If they pushed that many cows and calves up through here, the herd bull would obviously follow, but most likely so would a satellite bull or two, and if they got anywhere close, we might be able to call one in. Swapping back and forth. Huh? I told you there's... You didn't believe me, huh? We watched as a pretty good-sized bull crossed the road with his bunch, and then right behind him came another bull pushing another 15 to 20, 25 head. There were elk all over down there, and none of them were coming up here. All we could do was sit tight. If we walked out in the sun, this would be over before it got started, so we just had to sit here. And when they got out of sight, then maybe we could move around and get an idea where they were headed. Man, there's a mess of them. Where you been hiding all of them? You see all of them? There's got to be 30. There's the bull. They're a little out of range for my bow, though. I think they're going to go up towards Steamboat. They're crossing the road right there. Crazy outfit. In 3 days you can see one. There's 35 or 40 of them right there. And I know I heard a couple bugle when we were walking in the dark over there. So they're around. We just got to get one like around here because my 700-yard sight pin isn't set yet. There's a mess of elk crossing. The good news, we'd finally found the elk. The bad news, they still had an awful lot of real estate to choose from. Finally, a couple of nice bulls pushing herds of cows and calves. We watched and then slipped off the backside of the hill we were sitting on. We needed to work our way around, try to put them to bed for the day, figure out where they were bedding up, so then maybe we could get in front of some of them when they came down to feed that night. At least that was my plan. We waited till they finally got past us, and then we searched from the old homestead all the way up to Steamboat. We were looking everywhere. The elk were just gone. And then finally, there's some, you see them right there? So there, Brandon, there are 2 elk here. There they were, slabbing off the side of the farm mountain below Steamboat. At least one of the groups was working down through the oak brush. See him walking?
No. So straight up this, right up that ridge there, and there's a sagebrush, kind of a triangle point there.
Yep. There's some, you see him right there? You see the long ledge, right?
Oh, there I see him.
Okay.
Going up or coming down. Yeah, I see him.
And even from this distance, you could tell there was at least 2 or 3 dandy bulls working along with him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a shooter.
Uh-huh.
2 bunches.
2 bunches.
Yep. It wasn't likely we were going to call them over to our side of the valley, but at least we knew where they were. That's a pretty nice bull in the back there. There's a bunch of them pulling up out of there. You just run up there and get you one. I'll wait right here. I'll get lunch ready. Or supper. Or maybe breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Even tomorrow.
I bet that's where they bed down.
Yep. A couple of them pretty good. Maybe we can get set up somewhere tonight that'll, I don't know, maybe Anderson Springs or down at that tank down the hill there. We'd solved at least part of the puzzle. Now we needed to get just a little bit lucky. Well, we knew where the elk were, but that didn't necessarily mean we knew where they were going. This is huge country, so if we were going to get Brandon in front of one for his first ever chance, we were going to have to get more than a little bit lucky. And believe it or not, that very night, just before it got too dark, he's coming to the water. Brandon had come 2,000 miles and waited an entire lifetime for this moment. And now it was finally here. A gorgeous bull, no more than 30 yards out. Brandon waited until he figured he'd drunk his fill and then drew his bow, anticipating the turn. But the bull just stood there. Brandon finally had to let his bow down, and of course, as soon as he did, he drew again. The bull was walking right out in front of him. It couldn't get any better than this. And then he turned again. Brandon waited, and then he turned back. Get another arrow. Get an arrow. Brandon had missed, but the bull was still standing there. There was still a chance. Get it up, hurry up. And then, hurry up.
He's already too far.
And then there was none. The bull just walked away. Well, that's not how the dream is supposed to end. And for the record, I do believe that any of you that have never missed have every right to give Brandon the gears about his case of giant buck fever. The rest of us, well, for me at least, let's just say, brother, I feel your pain. I've been there, done that. Hunting, friends, is hunting. And 8, 18, or 80, it is exciting and dramatic and traumatic. It's supposed to be. If it weren't, why would you go? If you've never had to fight back the butterflies, if you've never had to control the shakes, well, I truly feel sorry for you, because that is what it is to be alive. That's the real world reaching out and touching you. And I truly believe that that's what it is to be human. Hey, I hope you get out there. I hope you try that. Get yourself in that adrenaline control frame of mind and see, can you master one of them big old bulls? And if you do, who knows? You might run into us trying to do the very same thing, because I'm certainly going to go back and give it a try. Hey, I hope we do see you out there. And if we do, you know we're going to stop and share that cup and a fire. And if we don't see you out there, friends, well, then you know we're going to be right back here so we can share another adventure from my Wilderness Journal.